Hey guys, so in this class, I said that we would talk about three types of paragraphs, right? We talked about introductory paragraphs, we talked about body paragraphs, and now we're going to talk about concluding paragraphs. So all three of these paragraphs have different techniques that you can use. You can use all of these techniques kind of moving forward. You can use them in your history class, your psychology class, right? You can use them in grad school. So for conclusion paragraphs, there are a couple techniques that I'd like you to use. Conclusions can be really, really rough, right? I've been a student. I know that by the time you're finished writing your paper, by the time you've done a brainstorm and an outline, maybe done some research, done some reading, done the rough draft, done revisions, right? That kind of thing. By the time you get to your conclusion, you're just like, oh, I don't want to think about this for one more second, right? But if you think about your concluding paragraph, it is the last part of your essay, right? It's also the last thing that your professor reads before they give you a grade. So you're going to want to make it impactful, not just because it's the last place for you to say, hey, this is my point, but also it's the last thing that's read before you get that grade, right? So you want it to be memorable. So you don't want to rush it or just wait till the last minute to do it. I know when I was a student, I'd be like, oh, cool, I just have the conclusion to do it. It'll take me like 2 minutes and I'll slap that on and be done. You don't want to do that, right? You also don't want to just summarize your essay. I think that that's something that you learn in high school. And I think that for some types of papers, like maybe biology papers or something like that, that can be useful. But in this type of essay, you don't want to just summarize it. I'd like you to also steer clear from starting off your conclusion by writing in conclusion to summarize or in this paper, right? Instead, I'd like you to explore other transition words that kind of elevate your tone, but still get your point across, right? So you can use a word like therefore, right? Or you can kind of jump in using one of these techniques that I use or offer you. So a couple other things that you don't want to do before we get into what you should do. I'd like you to try and stick to the tone of your paper. So this is weirdly where I see students kind of switch tones. We talked about a little bit about language in our first unit, right? And we talked a little bit about code switching, how we write differently when we're writing for an essay than we would write when we're writing like an email to a friend or a text message or something on social media. So we want to make sure that we carry our tone throughout the conclusion. Right? One of my favorite examples is one of my first years teaching, I had a student and she wrote this really eloquent essay, and in her conclusion, she ended it, it was an essay about sort of what the safest type of car is, right? And at the end of the essay, she wrote, R.I.P. Paul Walker, right? Which is a very nice sentiment, but it kind of shifted the tone of her essay, right? And instead of kind of continuing with that collegiate tone where I took her very seriously, it sort of shifted how I viewed it. You also want to stay on topic of your paper. So sometimes I kind of see people veer off topic because they're not really sure what to put in their conclusion, but you want to stay on the sort of broader topic of your essay. I'd like you to also steer clear from using examples or information that would be better in a body paragraph, right? Just like how in the intro, we're not going to use like quotes from the text to back up our point. We're not going to do that in the conclusion. Okay, so what does go into a conclusion, right? I've just told you what you absolutely should not do, but what should you do? So you want to kind of touch on the main idea of your essay, and then use the rest of your conclusion as a space to kind of invite your reader into that topic, right? How can I make them care about the information that I just gave them, right? So whether this is an argumentative essay or even a literary analysis, what information do I want to leave them with, right? So I'd like you to consider the following. These can even be brainstorming questions, right? I always encourage you to brainstorm for individual paragraphs. So maybe kind of jot out ideas about these 3 questions before you write that conclusion. So what thoughts do I want to leave my reader with, right? Do I want to leave them thinking about sort of who they want to be a leader in their life, what kind of leader they could be themselves, what kind of leader they can foster, right? What do I want them to remember, right? So what is the overall idea, right? So when I say like, so what, right? Why is this important? So I know that you're writing these essays because I'm like, hey, please write this essay. But readers care about your topic if you care about your topic, right? So what do I want them to remember, and why is this topic important, right? What might it show an individual or society, right? Or a certain group of people even. You want to leave that lasting impact and really answer that question in the conclusion. So what? Why is this important to think about, to write about, to even discuss? So consider whether there's some sort of lesson or universal idea that you can leave them with, right? If you kind of think about people in general, they care about things that relate to them. So like I said, kind of invite your reader to kind of think about this and then sort of let them go into the real world to sort of apply what they've learned in your essay. So a couple other techniques you can use. You can have like a call to action, right? So what should society do, right? Everyone needs to, stand up and start really thinking about how they can foster good leadership for the next generation, right? Suggest results or consequences. If we don't start really looking at, creating good leadership or really rewarding good morals and leaders, then A, B, or C will happen. Really connect the ideas to the lives of your audience and what they know about them, what you know about them, right? So this is a really good place to think about, who is my audience, right? One thing you can also do is called bookending, right? And this is actually a really nice way to make your essay sort of come full circle. So if you have a hook in your introduction, you can sort of have part of that hook in your intro and then pick up where you left off in that conclusion, right? So one thing that I've seen students do, which is really effective, is their hook is like a small anecdote, right? Like one of those little stories that has a meaning to it. So they start with that anecdote, but they don't really finish it, right? And then when they get to the conclusion, they kind of take the space to finish that anecdote. You could also bring in a new quote that really stands out to you. Just make sure you cite it. You could use a different image or a different anecdote. Or you could ask a provocative question, right? Something to really ask your readers, hey, what do you think about this? So in the intro, if you think about it, right, we started off here. I'm going to move myself over. We started with that idea of we start off broad with that hook and we funnel it down to that really specific thesis, right? So part of the reason we do that, we have that hook that kind of relates to a wider audience, might touch on things that relate to your reader, are kind of interesting, right? And then we narrow it down to that specific thesis. We're going to do the opposite for our conclusion, right? We're going to start kind of narrow by touching on that main idea, and then broaden our ideas to connect to our audience and society, and then end with something that they can bring out into the world with them, right? Something to kind of push them back into the world, kind of considering how they can apply what you've said to your own life. So I know that is a lot to think about and a lot to ask. Your conclusion doesn't have to be like super life-changing, but think about kind of using these different techniques that I've suggested. Finally, I do want to remind you that a full paragraph is at least 8 sentences, and this is for conclusion and intros as well, right? So definitely make sure that that conclusion is that full 8 sentences at least. You can feel free to try a combination of the techniques through this PowerPoint, and again, maybe take some time and brainstorm, right? Because this is the last thing that your reader takes a look at, and you do want to kind of pack that punch, right? Kind of answer that so what. Okay? I look forward to looking at your conclusions for this essay.